Hi, I'm Molly Superthorpe. Here on my channel, I offer bite-sized tutorials and demonstrations in hand lettering. And today I'm going to bring you along with me as I create a flourished calligraphy layout design in Procreate. As I go, I'll be providing commentary so that you can see and understand every step I make, even my mistakes. So let's dive right in. I've already created for myself here an 8 by 10 inch artboard, and I've set myself up with 400 DPI. And the reason for that is that I know that I don't know yet if I'm going to print this or enlarge it one day, so I like to have a really hefty DPI size so that I know that I can enlarge it later without fear of pixelation. So if I come up here to canvas information, you can see here 8 by 10, 400 DPI. First, what I'm going to do for layout design is add a background grid for my letter layout. And conveniently, I have a lot of those actually that I give away for free to my newsletter subscribers. Honestly, totally free, no strings attached whatsoever. So I'll link that down below in the description so that you can head over and have a look at them too. But I'm going to select my grid number 7, which is my basic modern calligraphy slant guide. And then with magnetics and uniform turned on, I'm just going to pinch it and enlarge it so that it fills the screen. It doesn't matter that it was originally a horizontal grid. So if I zoom in here for you at home, you can see that I have a baseline and I have a nice little dotted slant line that I can generally adhere to. But if you know my style, you know that I have no qualms about disregarding grids and slants and all of that, so long as I think that it looks good. So with my grid layer placed, I'll create a new blank layer and navigate to a pencil. I have a lot of pencil brushes that I've personally customized for myself, but lots of them come with Procreate, and honestly, this is just for sketching, so you can choose the pencil that you prefer if you're following along. And I have myself set up with a black color, and I'm just going to start sketching in very roughly the text that I want to calligraph today. And I'm using a basic script style, and at the end I'm going to go into some ways that you can find inspiration for your own letter forms, but first I'll just show you how I do it. So let me just get started throwing some of my words in here. I do not care at all that these are sloppy. I'm not even actually trying to make them look good. I'm trying to make sure that I know, or I'm able to figure out at this point, how many lines I'm going to need, how many words per line, all of that stuff, so that I can get things kind of centered and roughly laid out before I go in and make a lot of changes. So I can already tell, because I happen to know that my quote is kind of long, that I'm going to want something slightly smaller than this. So I'll come up to my selection tool before I've even written out the entire quote. And I'll shrink it, I'll center that, and now knowing that I'm going to keep it at least at this size, I'll come to my grid and using the selection tool, with uniform turned off, I have it on freeform. I'm going to shrink this down so that the X height, which is the space between two baselines, roughly sits in the X height of the letters that I just resized. Now, my number one motto that if you've seen others of my videos you may know is new line, new layer. So I sketched out this line already, so moving to my next line, I'm creating a new layer for that. I can tell you already, I'm eventually going to want to shrink all this text one more time, but let's keep going so that we can see just how much we're going to want to shrink it. Okay, in fact, I know already that I'm going to shrink this a lot. So I'm going to combine these down into a folder. I'm just moving all of my layers into this folder, and I'm reordering them as I go just because it's more convenient. Then I'll tap the group itself and my selection tool with magnetics turned on. I'll shrink the whole thing and recenter it based on centering the top line. Okay, I'll deselect, come to my grid layer, hit the selection tool, and start shrinking down my grid so that, again, watching just the first line, I can make sure that the baselines sit snugly on the base and top of the X height of my lowercase letters. Okay, now I know that I'm going to need even more grid than this, so I'm duplicating my grid, selecting, dragging it down. That's fine. Tap, merge down, and now I have a larger grid. The grid will ultimately go away, so this is really just for the sake of my sketching. Okay, now even though I haven't finished my quote, I'm still, just because I want to make sure I'm on the right track, going through and slightly resizing, slightly centering the lines I've already sketched. Okay, and now I'll just keep going with my sketching. Okay, I have everything sketched out here, and I'm zooming out and I can see immediately I spaced these lower lines closer together than I did the upper lines. Here I have 2 full lines in between the top and bottom, but I have between the top and second line, but I have 3 lines in between the next. So because I want to flourish this a lot, I'm going to give myself extra space. So let me start by moving the first line up, and I'll just respace these. Now I'm moving my whole group up a line because I want to put the credit line. Turning off my grid, it kind of helps me to see the spacing again just a little bit. Okay, gonna shrink the whole thing even more. Yeah, I think that this will be very nice. I'm gonna resize my grid one last time to fit my newly resized letters. Okay, I think that that's a rather nice layout in terms of letters per line and really ugly, sloppy calligraphy so far. I like this. Sometimes what I would do is, for example, if one line looked a lot longer than the other, I might go back at that point and move the last word from the long line onto the beginning of the next line, etc. But I don't think that I have to do that today with this. So what I'll do now, I hope you can see why I put each line on its own layer. It makes it much easier to move things around and reorient them. But now that I've done that, I don't need these on their own layers anymore, so I'll flatten that group. Now this is just one layer. I'll reduce the opacity ever so slightly and turn back on my grid, make a new layer, and I'm just gonna quickly go back over this one more time, again with pencil, just to really solidify a lot of the shapes and the spacing between words. Still, I'm not adding flourishes. You may find it a bit tedious, but I find it quite meditative. When it comes to my ascenders and my descenders, like the top of this D or the tail of a Y, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm going to go back and flourish them later, but the point now is just to get sort of the letters properly oriented on the line and, make sure that I have all of my spacing in place before I'm going to go back and decorate. You can see that, as is very common, I often end my new revised version slightly to the right of my previous, because often when I'm sketching I tend to make my letters a little bit too narrow or the connections between letters a little bit too small. Here's a great example on this F. I don't want to adhere too carefully to the grid, but I do want to adhere somewhat, and you can see that my sketched F has this axis, but my slant is this axis, and that's just a little bit too different for my taste. So when I go back to redo this, I'm going to correct that axis somewhat. Okay, so here I really shrunk things too much in my initial one. As I go, I'm actually making my revised version slightly over to the left so that I can keep a closer traced version of my lower layer. Okay, zooming out now, I'll turn off my draft layer. I'll even turn off my grid for a second because that really helps me check on the layout. Now my goal is to critique my work and for my eye to zoom into places like this. The space between these letters is much too big. So making sure that I'm roughly centered first, then I'll go in and make these edits. So I know that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th line. And I know that this is the layer I started with, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's the line. And all I'm going to do is come to my selection tool. I'll turn back on my grid. Selection tool. And I'm just going to go through like this and fix the spacing between various words. Okay, with that done, I'll just do one last pass, roughly centering things. And I call this optical centering because if you actually centered this mathematically and perfectly, to the eye, given some curves and straight lines, it actually might not look centered. So it doesn't even matter if it's mathematically centered. It matters if your eye can center it. So I'll just make sure I like how this looks so far. And once you get the top layer centered, you can kind of start centering the other lines below it, knowing that, we're going to add some flourishes, so things will change a little bit. Okay, just to zoom around this a little bit for you to take a look. Here we have this still incredibly sloppy pencil version of the artwork. Now I'm going to actually delete my first draft, I don't need it, and I'm going to flatten this into one layer, and the quickest way is to actually pinch those layers together. And now they're on one layer. And I'm going to make a new blank layer, and sometimes I do this by eye if it's a larger file or I just have the time. I do this by hand, but I'm going to turn on a really high contrast color. And on a blank layer, I'm going to come around and I'm going to start drawing in some flourishes that I could add here. So this is for me the fun part, and there's a lot of trial and error to figure out what you think is going to look good, but I recommend that this is the best type of flourishing practice, is like flourishing in the wild, not just individual letters, but flourishing in such a way that the words can sort of connect and that the lines can intertwine. So let me just get started here. Actually, I'm going to slightly reduce the opacity. There we go, so that this fuchsia that I've chosen really pops out. And sometimes, rather than just flourishing, this can mean sort of slightly refining the letter forms. I'll zoom in even more for your benefit. These two ascenders here give me the opportunity to do something big, so I think I'll choose to do something big with the H, especially because this is the top line. I get to have a lot of fun making something that really pops up above the ascender height. Here with this E, I can have fun. I'm not even going to separate these by line. I'm just going to do this all on one layer. You can see on this N and on this W, when a curve, it's called an overturn, is at the beginning of a word, I often like to accentuate it a little bit if I can. We'll add a little loop to this R and make it go below the baseline. Here I'm going to have a situation between the Y and the T, where I'm going to have to choose whether I want to flourish the T or the Y, because we can't have them intersect. Because I have a T here that I know I'll have the opportunity to flourish, I'll choose the Y, and I'll really do a nice flourish here that takes up a lot of the blank space between these two lines. You can have so much fun with the first words of a line, especially if they have an entry stroke like this, like the F. Like an A is hard because it doesn't have a natural entry stroke, but an F does, so that makes it really fun. I don't do too much refining of these drafts, but when I know, like I just did right now, that I'm going to want to make an edit, I do that. So I'm actually going to shrink this T slightly lower so that it's not going to touch the Y when I end up flourishing that Y's tail. Sometimes I do if I have no other way to fill a space, but like this G, I can see that below I have a D where I'll have an opportunity to fill this space. So I'm not going to flourish the G because it's in the middle of a word, and instead I'm actually going to reduce it. Contrast is important, so you don't want to flourish every ascender and descender and curl, because when you actually do fewer and you make them really strategically placed, then that's actually when it looks the most dramatic. Okay, so here I gave myself that space for a D, planning in advance to flourish it. Here I have a nice opportunity for connected flourishing between the stroke of the T and the L. So I'm going to see how I like that. This is what I mean by sort of locked. Like the word street is a great example, and for calligraphers for whom stationary design is their bread and butter, we get to write the word street a lot. It's not really my bread and butter anymore. It used to be the main thing I did at the beginning of my career, but I've probably written the word street, I don't know, thousands and thousands of times. Zooming out, I can see that I have basically chosen the same flourish for these 3 lines in a row, and I don't like that at all. So I'm going to take my eraser, I'm going to enlarge it, I'm going to figure out a new solution for sure right here. I do not like flourishes to repeat. It makes them look more programmed and less natural, less human. And I'm probably going to redo this one. Okay, so let's fix that. We can just make this sort of big without so much of a flourish. Yeah, there, I've reversed the loop here for this H. That's gonna look better. In fact, yeah, I'll make it connect in on itself. This K I'll keep pretty low so that it doesn't intersect with that F, but I will do something here with the W at the end. W's can have fun with little loops on them. I'll keep this D small so that I can actually do something huge with the H. And I'll keep this L and this T kind of small, and I'll do something huge with the Y. It's a shame that I don't have anything on this side of the bottom line, so let's figure out an entry stroke for this A. Yeah, even something simple like that is an improvement. And I'm going to keep the byline, Rachel's name, unflourished. Okay, now what I get to do is actually the fun part, using my calligraphy pen. I'm going to reduce the opacity on both of these layers, but so I still have them both visible. Create a new blank layer and go to black. Little hack, if you want pure black, instead of coming over here and trying to pick it and maybe being slightly off, you can actually just double tap at the bottom and it snaps to pure black. I'm going to be using my own brush set here. It's called the Calligraphy Nibs brush set, and I have a fine point calligraphy pen in here. I'll put the link in the description below if you want to buy this brush pack too. It comes with like, 6 calligraphy pens plus a bonus monoline pen, but you can use any lettering brush that you like if you don't have my brush set. Okay, and now I'm just going to go through, and this is the most relaxing part for me, and just calligraph all of these. It can take me a few tries, by the way, to get the right line width. This is a very pressure sensitive brush. I tried to design it to be as faithful to a calligraphy dip pen as possible. So based on the size of the letters, you may have to spend a little bit of time adjusting the brush size. Oh, and of course, the DPI of your file also matters to this. So there's no one size fits all for this. You'll have to choose a custom size based on your design. And here a lot of refining comes into place. I mean, this does take quite a bit of practice, but there's no better way to practice, in my opinion, than to do exactly what I'm doing now, making layouts and just sort of doing it. But it does take practice to kind of know what refinements to make here as you go. I mean, no pencil is going to be as refined as a calligraphy pen, so there was no point anyway earlier to try to make refined pencil. New line, new layer. And with this brush set, by the way, just like with a real calligraphy pen, if you slow down once you get to the bottom baseline, you're gonna get that full nib width bottom to your stroke. Whereas just like with a calligraphy pen, if you don't hold your pressure as you go down, you're gonna get a tapered end. So in this particular design, I like to have this full nib width at the bottom. Okay, great. Now I have traced over my 2 layers of pencil with my calligraphy brush, and I'll just zoom around this for you to kind of see. You can see how many places there are where, I mean, obviously the calligraphy pen makes such a huge difference, but where I just really refined as I went. But on the other hand, having that pencil template was invaluable. I was able to just speed through the actual calligraphy pen process, which you see is a lot slower than drawing with pencil. So I'll turn off those 2 draft layers, zoom out, I'll turn off the grid, and now I'm gonna do another once over scan where I'm gonna look for words that are spaced too far apart, lines that no longer look centered because flourishes may be taking up more or less of the left and right sides. Okay, there we go. So now, of course, if you had edits to the actual artwork, like let's say you wanted to come in, actually I'll show you, yeah, let's pretend that I want to redo this E. And in fact, I do now think that since I recentered it, the E looks a bit smushed and too close to the T. So one method, if you kind of want to base your redo on the previous version, is simply to come to that layer and reduce its opacity dramatically. Create a new blank layer over it and come back to your brush. And then redo it by sort of tracing over your previous version, but editing as you go. Right, I know I like that a lot better. So now I can select the layer below it and select my eraser tool. Erase the work underneath. Turn back up the opacity, shift this E slightly in place, or I can extend slightly the connector stroke. All right, that looks much better, so I'll tap it and merge down so that this layer is one piece again. All right, let's just take a little spin around what we've got here. Okay, I think this is pretty good. And if you're unhappy with your flourishes or anything like that, I recommend doing a second colored pencil layer. So just throw a blank layer on top of this, make your changes with pencil, and redo your calligraphy. It's as simple as that. I'm really a believer in pencil edits and drafts and sketching and all of that. So I could call this done if I want, or I could change the color, and let me just quickly show you how to do that. I always work with black on white for the contrast and the simplicity and honestly the beauty of it. Half the time that's what I want to keep. But here we have all these layers, not grouped together or anything. So the first thing I want to do is group the layers. I don't want to merge them because maybe one day I'm going to want to separate them again. So I'm going to group them, and I'm going to put them into the group bottom to top so that I'm organizing them as I go. And you see that, in fact, the layers are numbered, so this makes it quite easy as I was making them. We have layer 4, 5, 6, and I'll just keep going and creating this group. Great. Now all of the layers are together in one group. All right, so to change the color of this, let's say I want to reverse it and make the background black and the lettering white. Well, I can create a new layer, go to white, tap, and fill. Then I do have to have a flattened layer to recolor it, but I don't want to do anything destructive, which means I don't want to destroy my broken up layers. So I'm going to duplicate that group, tap it and flatten it, and turn off the group below it. The full layout design is on one layer. And then I'll tap my filled in color layer and do a clipping mask. You can see I didn't choose a pure white, but that's okay. And now I'll tap the background color and I'll change it to anything that I want. I like this charcoal. And of course, immediately, all calligraphers know this, white on black just triples the elegance of any design. And depending on your composition, you kind of can't go wrong with it. All right, so there you go. This is my process for creating a flourished calligraphy layout design in Procreate. And no matter the length of the quote or the composition, I usually use this exact process of drafting in pencil and then moving on to the calligraphy nibs. So remember that if you want to have my free lettering guide grid pack, look down in the description for that link, as well as my calligraphy nib brush set, which is what I use today. I use the fine point calligraphy pen in the smooth stroke, and I'll link that below as well if you want to grab it. I want to end this video with a few ways that you can get inspiration to create different lettering shapes and kind of practice the actual letter forms of your modern calligraphy. And the first is my newest book, Mastering Modern Calligraphy, where I have over 2,700 different letters and ligatures of connected letters. You can go through and trace, even get the ebook version and open it on your iPad to work with if you want to. I even show the letters with arrows so that if you're new to this craft and you want to practice your strokes, whether it's ink on paper or on the iPad, you can go through this and pick up a lot of the letters. After that, after basic modern letter variations, I have a lot of different styles for you to look at. And then, like I said, some words, some phrases. I have a monoline style. And then I have even more sort of in-depth advice about creating layout designs, not on the iPad per se, but it can apply to iPad calligraphy. But I did write it for calligraphers who are doing ink on paper designs. Backhand script. Advice about drawing in different layouts. Basically, my goal with this was to overwhelm you with information and inspiration of different letters. So that's a really great place to start if you're really looking for some very concrete inspiration or letters to copy in your practice. And then the other place is my free toolkit, which is the same toolkit where you can get the free grid sheets that I mentioned before, and it's linked still down in the profile, Molly's Lettering Toolkit. And in that, I already have a number of practice sheets and exemplars for a few modern styles, and I do update that download library often. I add to it and I don't subtract anything. So if you sign up and you get the downloads now, then whenever I release a new product, like new practice sheets or new Procreate brushes, you'll get an email letting you know, and you can just go right away and download them for free. So that's the free option, and this book, I've linked it down below for all sorts of places around the world to buy it. This is a bit of an investment financially, but something that you can keep next to you on your desk and hopefully look through for a lot of inspiration.